welcome back to another episode of AuthorTube Cafe. We have the ultimate guest with us today, Alyssa from Alyssa and the Books.
Hello, thanks for having me. I wouldn't go so as far as to say ultimate guest, but I am honored to be on the AuthorTube Cafe. I am an avid fan.
Wow.
This is only the second episode, but I think I should win the most dedicated fan award.
If you're not familiar with this series, essentially the premise is that I bring some of your favorite AuthorTubers on. We chat all things writing, publishing, etc. with cute little drinks in hand. What do you have to drink today, Alyssa?
Very boringly, I have some immune boosting tea.
Okay.
Because I'm not out here getting sick. Our temperatures are changing just really rapidly, and so sometimes that can get things messed up. So I'm trying to fight off all the sickness around me. I also have the shreds of a Diet Dr. Pepper, literally the smallest amount possible. So just double it up with two very different drinks.
Very different
How
drinks.
About you?
I have English breakfast tea with a splash of oat milk, which this has been my wave ever since I did that collab with Anna, because she made me drink this, and I'm actually obsessed now. So
very, I was going to say it's very British of you to have English breakfast tea.
I know, but I'm obsessed. It's very chai-esque, pretty similar vibe.
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mostly just put a lot of cream in chai teas because I don't actually like the taste of chai. So maybe I just shouldn't have chai teas is maybe what you would argue from that, but love it. Interesting.
Yeah. I realized I didn't do this last time, which in hindsight, I'm like, actually how and why? But in case anyone does not know you and is not a watcher of your channel, do you want to give a quick, who are you? What do you do? In case anyone's unfamiliar with you?
For sure. So I'm on AuthorTube under the channel Alyssa and the Books. I do a lot of writing vlogs and also deep dives into different things about traditional publishing and querying. I am querying right now. I've written 5 books at this point, and they're mostly thrillers. I had a dystopian moment when I was 14, as we all do. But since then, it's mostly been thrillers. Started with a young adult, and now the last 3 have been adult thrillers. So that's the vibes. I also do a lot of live streams too, but generally just writing books.
Love it. Yep. Okay, exciting. So one of the things that I'm most excited about with having Alyssa on is I feel like she has a pretty different perspective, written multiple books in the last several years. She's pursuing trad pub, which kind of leads me into the first thing that I wanted to ask you about and talk about is the fact that you've done these multiple projects over the last few years. And I feel like there's kind of 2 paths when it comes to starting a writing journey, either having one manuscript that is your child and you work on it for years and endless rounds of revision, and it's the book that you want to go out of the gate with, or kind of like what you've done, focusing more on getting your reps in and having multiple projects in a few years. And so I guess what I'm curious to hear is why did you decide to go that route? What do you view as the pros of getting through multiple projects in your first couple of years, and just your opinion on those 2 different strategies?
Yeah. Well, I think I kind of started that way, which I think where you spend a lot of years on one project. My book I read in high school, it took, I think, probably 5 years to get a first draft of that. And I think that that's kind of just the nature of writing something that's really long, but also just your first book because you don't really know how to do it. But since I'm going to traditional publishing, I have been researching about odds and stats and how many books it takes and all that stuff for honestly, I think 10 years now. I remember in high school, watching all those videos, breaking down query letters and listening to people's stories through traditional publishing. And something that I just heard a lot of times was it's not going to be your first book for most people, right? Because at that, your first book, for a lot of people, it just isn't quite there yet. Cause learning to write a book is this huge, massive skill that has all these different levels. You need to be able to write the book and revise the book and edit the book, which I think are 3 different skills. And so rather than focusing, once I got through that first project, rather than focusing on okay, I'm going to keep reworking this. It's not working. I'm going to rework it again. I'm going to rewrite the whole thing again. I got the book to a point where I was okay, this is the best way I can tell this story right now at the skills that I have. So I'm going to push it out into the world And now that I've had one rep in outlining, writing, revising, and editing, I'm going to do it again, because the next time that you go, like, my outlining is going to be stronger the next time, and my drafting is going to be stronger the next time. So rather than trying to work with this, like all the way back to the outline wasn't even very good on that first book. So it's like, rather than having to deal with a lesser skilled version of me and that work, instead focusing on like, okay, I did it once. It's decent. It's fine. Let's see if I can do it again better, you know? And I think I just like learn each time you start the process over, you get better at it and you get stronger at it. And so, and I like experienced that. And so then I was like, okay, well, and especially knowing like, if I'm not going to get an agent with this book, or if this book isn't going to sell, like I got to have something else in the pipe. We got to just keep on going. Right. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Very interesting. I feel like that's really interesting because despite the differences in our journeys, because obviously you're pursuing trad and I'm pursuing self-publishing, I feel like I try to adapt a similar mindset of wanting to move through projects and get multiple books done in the next several years. The primary difference obviously being, instead of sending books off to querying, I'm potentially going to be sending books off into publication. But I do feel like it's a similar situation of wanting to keep evolving and keep growing with each book, regardless of what the outcomes of those projects are. I think also what you mentioned of that book was as good as I could get that book is really important, because I feel like there's something to be said for a book being a product of its time and where you were at in your journey when you decided to work with that concept. I've heard, you know, published authors say, would I still write my first book the way that I wrote it now? No. But would I change that book? No, because the writer that I was at that time wrote that story in that way. And that's how that book was meant to be. And I find a lot of comfort in that thought of like, even as I get further into my career and maybe what I'm writing or how I'm writing it changes, these earlier projects will still be what those books were meant to be, because I do think like ideas come to you at a specific time for a reason and they're meant for that current version of you. Do you resonate with that at all?
Oh my gosh, yes. And one of my favorite things to do is when I find an author that I really love is read their backlist and like start from the beginning. One author I did this with is Colleen Hoover, who I know is controversial, but she has so many books out. She's such an interesting case study. I talked about this. If you like want to go back to deep cuts of Alyssa and the books, I would like mention this off and on, like, oh, I'm reading every book Colleen Hoover's ever written, and like, oh, I'm going to make a video about it one day. Never made the video. But what I found really interesting was like the books that like It Ends With Us, right? That like everybody knows about, like the big popular ones, are so different in terms of genre, in terms of like writing style, in terms of all those things from the beginning, but they're all like, you can tell that the same person wrote them and they're all like good on their own, but it's like, you can see her just like tackling different types of topics and like evolving with taste.
Yes.
And so I think that's a good example too of like, even in traditional publishing, you see that. You see people go through different eras in their writing and publishing. So I think it's like, and that's what art is, right? It's about like watching someone's perspective on a certain topic or story or world. Like that's what you're doing when you're reading a book, experiencing that author's perspective on that story at the time that they wrote it, you know?
Yes. I feel like it's so easy to spiral into overthinking and overworking a project if you are sort of obsessively holding that singular project on a pedestal, or like working on it for so many years over so many different life stages, which also kind of, I think, ties into the conversation about a book idea comes to you at a specific point. I feel like there could be a point where I've been working on said book for so long that what I was drawn to about it no longer resonates with the current version of me, or like it no longer feels like my story to tell. So I feel like that's something I try to remain conscious of, because even though I'm taking my time with this opening project, I'm like, I don't want it to overstay its welcome to the point where I've over wrestled with it and it's lost something that was core to it. Does that make sense?
Yes, that totally makes sense. And I also think something, I mean, this is more so for TradPub, but I think it works for self-publishing too, because you could, instead of thinking of it as like, if this book doesn't get the agent, you could think of it as if this book flops and doesn't sell anything, right? You can think of it in kind of the same way, is that if you tie your identity to a book too closely, where instead of saying like, I'm a writer, you think I wrote this book and this book is me as a writer. And if this book fails, that means I failed, right? That's, I think, really damaging. And I get it, because it's like, if you have the story of your heart, you want to tell it, and there's so much of you in it. And so when that gets rejected, it feels like you, the person, the artist, is being rejected. Where I'm not I have a really good relationship with rejection. Of course, it still hurts every time, but it's not a rejection on me. It's not a reflection of me at all. It sort of is because it's my writing, but it's like that book didn't work, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's another, always my advice to people who are querying or maybe even like publishing is to start something new so that your identity is not tied up in this book that nobody's picking up, you know?
You could not have made that transition any better. It's like it's like you're good at this or something. Because something else I wanted to ask you about is you've shared multiple times that you try to do that overlap. And I'm curious how you navigate that kind of like one foot in two different projects position of like, I'm actively querying this one project, but I'm writing a different one. Like, how do you navigate that balance, keep from falling too far into one, pot or the other?
Yes.
Like, I'm curious about that.
That's a good question. So I guess this is sort of advice too, but when I query a book, that book is done. Like that book is the equivalent of published in my mind in terms of like, I cannot go back and edit that book. And that's always been my mindset. I'm now on the second book that I've queried. And so I never went back to near the end of June, which is the first book I queried afterwards. I never looked back. And so it was like, I'm just writing one book in my head. Like I only have one active project. But what's been interesting with The Wedding Season, which is the book I'm currently querying, is I've gotten feedback about the book during the querying process. There's a video on my channel about this, a few videos during this time. Over the summer, I got this rejection on a full request, and it brought up things where I was like, if I get another full, I want to address that now because it's like an easy fix. Like I can go back in. But the problem was I was also in the middle of revising a whole other book, which is like revision is such hard brain work. And so it really did just like take me out of it. But I am not a person who can really do two projects at the same time. And so when I was like, okay, I'm deciding this week, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to line edit The Wedding Season and I'm not going to do any revision. One day this will have to change because like hopefully I'll one day be in a spot where like maybe I'm in proof edits or like copy edits or something, but I'm obviously have to be starting another book. But I try not to mix them too much because it's also messes with, I used to call this like the dead space in your brain, which is like when you're not thinking about something, your creativity and your subconscious is like working on the story typically. And so I try not to have two stories like actively that I'm like working on and thinking through at the same time. But to go back to your initial question, I don't balance. I compartmentalize to the max because I'm like, I don't want any of that story's problems for me to start thinking that those are also problems in this book because it's like it might not be. It's really important to me to see the book for actually what it is. And so it's hard to do that when you're in two projects at the same time. Some people do it, but I couldn't be me. I don't understand. Teach me your ways, frankly.
I think that's such good advice. The part about like really viewing a book that's being queried as done, washing my hands of it for the most part, obviously with the exception of, like you said, like small tweaks or line edits or whatever. I could see how that would be super valuable. And I think it ties back into the conversation of like letting a book be what it was and not feeling this constant need to bring it up to your current self or what you would do with it now. Yeah. So I feel like that's really good advice.
It also helps with closure too, because it's like, I'm going to start getting a lot of FOMO next year when you all start publishing your books. And it's like, oh my gosh, your books are done and out and people can buy them. But I think having that mindset of like, when I start querying the book, like I'm done with the book. Like I finished the whole process of that book. It's helpful for that reason too.
Yeah. Almost like a weight off the shoulders of like project is wrapped up with a bow, like ready to move on. Yep. I like that. In like a conversation that we've had, you mentioned the fact that you can identify and see how you've grown with each book that you've worked on. And so I would love for you to break that down for the audience because I feel like it was so interesting. So take the floor.
Yeah, for sure. So going back to the olden days, about 10 years ago, I wrote a dystopian selection ripoff. It was like literally The Selection, if you've read that series, like to the extent where the main male character's name was Xander.
As it should.
In The Selection, it's Maxon, but I would like accidentally call him Maxon like in the writing. Like that's how similar it was. There's a caste system, all this stuff. And that book, I think, taught me how to like finish a book, right? How to like sit down and finish the book and have an idea and like execute it, right? But did I have a semblance of plot structure? Actually, yes, but not good plot structure. I just had like a notebook of chaos. I think I've like found it the other day and I was like, girl, I don't know what's going on. But that's what that first book taught me. It's what I think a lot of first books teach people, is just to like how to just get a book out of you, you know, because it's like such a massive thing. That book was like 200,000 words too. It was ridiculous. Ooh. Anyway, yeah, it was, there was illegal swing dancing. It was a whole moment. Anyway,
release the dystopian.
I wanted to be like The Giver, where it was like, they don't have any color, spoiler alert for The Giver. And I wanted to be like, they don't have any music. And so, but like the main guy is going to take them like illegally swing dancing. Anyway, so that's what that book taught me. Book 2, I wrote in college. And it's like what you were saying about each book is written like in a very specific point in time. Like I wrote it when I was in college, you know, and it was like a dual reality. And that book taught me how to plot a book. And like I learned in the revision of that book, actually, like about Save the Cat, because there was something about the book that just wasn't working. And that was the one that I seriously wanted to query. And is the first book I queried. And at that point I had watched a lot of resources about like, you need to go back and you need to edit a book. And I had not really edited my first book. And so going back and trying to identify like, what's actually wrong with this? Why does it feel so like bloated and weird and nothing, like there's no emotional impact the way that there is when I read, you know, because I read a ton at that point and it was like just not hitting the same. And I had like a general idea of plot structure just from reading a lot, but I'd never actually looked at a plot structure. And so the second book, I like plugged it into the Save the Cat beat sheet and I learned how to like actually revise a book into some semblance of an outline.
The book in question?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know why I sent you that one. Do not read that. The next one was The Wedding Season, which that's when I started this channel, was when I think I didn't film in November, but I started that book in NaNoWriMo that year. And in February, I finished it up. And that book taught me like how to write like compelling character arcs. I'm very plot focused typically. I mean, I think a lot of early writers are, because you're thinking about like what actually happens in the story rather than like what the heart of a story is, which is the characters. And at that time too, the main character was a wedding DJ, or is a wedding DJ. And I was DJing, like I DJed 20 weddings that year. And so I was kind of like processing through that. And I think because Eileen in that story is like basically how I was feeling about my job at the time, throw in some murders, you know, but like because that character arc was something I had just gone through, then that like subconsciously kind of took over the story, right? Like if you start reading that book, it's like, yes, there are bodies, but really it's about, at its core is about this relationship that she's in and about like how the outward circumstances kind of reflect that and like her journey through that. And so that's where I think I learned how to write like strong characters. And then Gas Station is where I which is the one I've been writing for the last year, for the most part, has taught me about romance, I would say, is the main thing, and like a dual POV, because that book is dual POV. And also near the end of June was very plot focused. The Wedding Season was very character focused. And this book, I think, has a good balance of it being a very character driven book, but also there's a lot going on and it moves quickly. And Sunshine, I don't even know. Yeah, because there's just a draft one of that thing. There's 90,000 words sitting in a Scrivener document that will not be touched for a while.
I'm dead. And would you say that this is something that you can only get in hindsight? Like when you were writing these, were you thinking, this is the book where I'm really going to learn how to do or was it very much in hindsight?
I think the only time I was really aware of it as it was happening was when I was revising near the end of June, because I was like, it was a moment of like, I don't know how to do this. Like, it's always been very intuitive, like plot structure and like story, because I've just like always watched a ton of TV and like a ridiculous amount and like read just a ton of books. And so I was like, oh, I know what happens in a book. Like, I know how to make those moments happen. But that was the first time I think I realized like, maybe I don't. Like, maybe I don't actually know how to do this. Maybe I need to learn, you know, and I don't like learning. I know everybody loves to learn. I do not like to learn. I like to know.
You know, and that's fair.
So yeah, that's the only time I think I was really like, okay, I'm learning how to do this, and I did it. And was it perfect? No. But like, it taught me how to actually revise. So yeah.
Nice. Is there one specific thing, or maybe one biggest thing that you can point to as the thing that really helped you to like level up to the writer that you are today?
So it's funny because in the new year, I'm actually going to have a series on my channel about leveling up as a writer, like how you can level up. You don't have to wait for somebody to level up. I think a lot of times like the criticism of traditional publishing, which I get, I understand why people say this. I feel like there's been a lot of talk recently about like, why would anybody do that? Like it feels like you're trying to wait for somebody's approval to do things, or you don't have control over how fast you write, or all this stuff, you know? And I understand that. Like I can see that, but also I think you don't have to wait for an agent. Like I think we're having this kind of weird view of what an agent is when we talk about traditional publishing, because it's not like the agent is going to come and be my fairy godmother and teach me everything I need to know about writing. Like an agent is like a business partner and a mentor, and they'll have edits because they've, you know, been in the industry for a long time. But like I can become the best writer that I can be, but without that, before that, you know? So anyway, this is a tangent, but I think I was avoiding the question because I need to think about the answer. So I think for me, it's mindset. I have never viewed writing as a hobby. It has never been a hobby for me. I mean, it always has, like if like legally by the definition of what a hobby is, like I haven't made money. I haven't, like, it's not an actual career, but in my mind, I've always been a career author. I've always viewed my projects as, is this marketable? Am I getting better? Am I getting closer? And so I think like reality, when I look at stats of like how many books I'm going to need to write, what kind of writer am I going to need to be? How experienced am I going to need to be? That has always pushed me to get more time on the page. I don't think there's like one specific skill that I learned like where it was like, oh, in this moment I'm leveling up to being a better writer. But because I've had this mindset of like, this is what I do. Like I write every week. I write a book a year about, like I write a new draft every year. I go through a vision. Like when I finish a book, I don't ever just sit and go like, okay, that was cool. I'm like, okay, what's the next draft? When am I getting it done? When's the next thing? What's the next deadline? And like, it's a job, right? And so that has been like led me to all of the leveling up that I've done, because it's never been my goal. Again, I don't like to learn. In my head, I've been like, oh, I want to like go and read a book about writing. I have never finished a craft book in my life. The way that I think I've leveled up as a writer is by just writing more and more, you know? So yeah.
I love that. One of the things that I think I admire most about you is that level of seriousness and the dedication to view yourself as a career writer before the external circumstances are affirming that. Like, I love that perspective of you kind of have to take yourself seriously first before you can like convince other people to take you seriously type of thing. And I think that that's so great that you're like embracing, yes, I'm, you know, seeking out this opportunity. Yes, I want to be able to work with other people on these projects. But until that moment comes, I'm not going to stall out. I'm not going to like just feel like I'm waiting around. Like I love how you're still actively pursuing goals and growth on your own. I think that's so cool.
That's the part of self-publishing that attracts me the most, actually, is that like you can, because I'm a self-starter. Like I decide and then I do, you know, like I don't decide and then sit around, you know? And so it's like, but I think just out of stubbornness, honestly, at this point. And then I'm like, I can see myself also getting closer, you know, to TradPub. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. But
you are.
I can feel that I'm improving and I'm getting closer. And so it's like, I still can have that write the next book, write 5 books a year, which I'm not doing. That was an exaggeration. 1 book a year, while still doing TradPub. Like I think you can do both. I think sometimes in creative spaces, we tend to fall into, and I think it comes from like fear of failure, of not wanting to say out loud, I want this and I want to succeed in it. Yes, I wrote the book of my heart. Yes, I love my story, but I still want to get an agent with it. And if that means I have to make a couple of sacrifices and like not make it be exactly what I want, like that's okay. You know, like, and I still want that. And it's still a book of my heart, even if I have to make a few tweaks. That's my number one. Never mind. I don't know if I'm going to go there. But that's my number one least favorite critique of querying and TradPub is that like you have to give up so much for yourself. Because I'm like, I just don't think that that's true. Like, I think that you can be yourself and be successful.
Yeah. And I do think there's something to be said for the fact that sometimes I do think the right move is sacrificing something you like a little bit for what's going to work for the audience.
Yes.
And it's a tricky balance, right? Because I even made a whole video about like writing for myself and yada yada. But I think that can be sometimes taken too far in the sense of like, well, I'm really attached to this character. I'm really attached to this scene. So even if other people say it's not working, too bad, because I want it in there. And I think you run the risk if you get too precious and too, well, I want it to be exactly how I want it to be, so I'm going to stick with that, of not being receptive to feedback and not being able to acknowledge when something isn't working. I think it would be interesting for us to transition to talking a little bit about authortube now, because I feel like in our downtime, Alyssa and I talk about this quite a lot.
We do.
As someone who I personally view as a very successful creator in the space, Alyssa, I would love to hear your tips for anyone who either just got started with authortube, wants to get started with authortube, tips for growing, tips for finding success, both on a potentially numbers level and on a fulfillment level, because I think both of us are passionate about what we're doing with our channels for sure. So yeah, would love to hear your tips.
That's a good. Ooh. I think my main tip is consistency. Because other than that one video that like got 8,000 views, like I have not had like any particular video that was like, oh my gosh, this video got 20,000 views and that's where 80% of my subscribers have come from. You know, like my growth has been very steady. Sometimes it's slower steadiness, sometimes it's faster steadiness, but it's not like, oh, like 200 subscribers are coming from one video, you know? And I think that that's sometimes the dream when you start a YouTube channel, is like, okay, one video is going to go crazy. And it's like some videos do better than others, obviously, but also it's impossible to predict or difficult to predict what videos those are going to be. So like, that's my main advice, is like show up, because I think if you present yourself and you're regularly there, and it's not even necessarily saying like, if you have to skip a week or a month, that'll totally tank you. But that kind of regular posting has like, I can just like see that it's worked, you know, and I haven't had a stall since like regularly posting. Like obviously some months are better than others, but and in terms of like the passion side of it, is especially for authortube, like create in a way that aids your writing. So for me, it's like, it's helpful for me to vlog all the time, because that motivates me to do it, you know, and it helps me to verbally process. But I know that's not the case for a lot of people. Like I know last episode you guys talked about like turning off the camera, and that helps you, right? So it's like, don't let authortube, your videos that you're making, hinder your creative process. If you feel pressure from the camera being there, turn the camera off when you don't need it for the video. You know, if it's hurting your story to make videos about your book, don't make videos about your book.
You could tweak your approach to authortube to best serve your writing practice. Like some people keep a little bit more distance. Maybe they're not so much vlogging, they're doing more so sit down reflection videos, because that's what works for them. And that can work very well. Or vice versa. Like you said, you find motivation in vlogging your process. So obviously you're going to lean more into vlogs and things that keep you accountable. So I think make it work for you is a great piece of advice. And like, also I would say lean into your strengths, both as a writer and as a creator. Like there are certain creators in the authortube space where their biggest strength is being very eloquent. Like the way that they speak about writing is extremely like poignant and resonates. And those creators lean into that very well. There's other creators where they're really good at being conversational and relatable, and maybe they're the vloggers in the space. So what have people praised as strengths of yours in the past? Is it making really beautiful shots? Is it the way that you talk? And like, how can you lean into that to maximize your chance for success? I think that's something that's important to think about.
Yeah. There's success in all different types of those. Like there's like writing vloggers who are very successful, and there's also like crafty sit down video people who are very successful. It's like, not one of them is not more successful than the other, you know, like deciding that. Yeah.
Kind of going back to what you said about the importance of consistency, like something that I think you do so well. This is the part where I gas you up, I think. Part of what I think you do so well is because of the amount of content that you're able to crank out, you have position yourself in people's routines. And I think this is something that's so valuable about like when you are doing your daily vlogging, and just like the amount of vlogging that you do is people get used to having you on when they're making breakfast, having their morning coffee, doing the dishes, whatever. You're there and you're someone that they can go to consistently, who's showing up, who they can rely on to be there as part of their routine. And I think that there's something really powerful in that, because I feel like when you can get to that point where you're integrated into your viewers' routines and they know the little tidbits about you, whether it's like, I feel like there's a whole slew of like Alyssa lore, whether it's the construction, it's her dislike for cleaning snow, it's baking bread. Like, you have this whole array of like
yes.
Reoccurring themes and like fun little things that pop back up for consistent viewers. And I think there's something very strategic in that, because you're building this deep connection with people that's, I think, is going to serve you really well long term. So.
Well, you know how I do with words of affirmation, so I have nothing to say in response to that nice compliment. Thank you. Are you proud of me, Bob? Okay.
So I'm curious to hear, going into the new year, I'm a big New Year's vibes type of person. Is there anything that you want to change about how you approached writing in 2024, or just like up till this point in 2025? Like, what do you want to do differently going forward?
Yeah. I was going to cockily say nothing, because no, I actually feel like I'm really happy with where my routines are right now, but I do want to, like, for my writing practice, I think I mentioned this, like, level up a little bit in terms of my process with, like, actually like revising books. Because in the past I've done a big revision and like I developmentally edit until I feel like the whole plot makes sense, and then I'll do a line edit, and then a copy edit. But I want to add more levels of revision into my process, where I'm looking at scenes specifically and like the arcs of scenes and the arcs of characters in scenes. And then I want to do a dialogue pass where I literally just take all of the dialogue in the book, take it out of the book, and like see if the dialogue on its own work. Like, I want to do more in-depth passes of things that I've heard people do with like agents and editors. Like, I want to start doing that just on my own first. I think that's the main thing. But like, I think this year has been, not to self-plug a video that I have not made yet, but like I made a video last year of like, here's what I want to do in 2024. And I'm going to do a video reacting to that video and seeing like how it went. And this was a year where I like almost hit all of my goals and like got into the routine that I've wanted to get into for years. And it takes a long time to get there. And so it's like, I don't have too much I want to change there, but like more so in the process of the book itself. So
I love that. My hopes for how I want my process to change in 2025, or my approach to change in 2025, is just taking myself more seriously as like an author and someone who's going to be entering into the self-publishing sphere. And so I want to approach my writing practice with that level of seriousness, and this is now part of my career, and let me treat it as such, because I feel like, I don't know if it was imposter syndrome or just like, first year of writing type things, but in 2024, I feel like I struggled to view writing as like seriously, or as much of like a part of my future direction as I want it to be. And I think part of that may have been like, I was trying to preserve some level of like not putting too much pressure on it, and like allowing myself to get into writing without overwhelming myself. And I think all of that is valid for a first year. But like now I feel like I'm at the point where I'm working to build consistency. I'm trying to make writing a habit, and I want to let myself lean into it as someone who will be publishing in the next couple years and acting that way, whether that's, taking the self-publishing side of things and taking action on that, whether that's hiring artists and leaning into thinking about marketing and blah, 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 or whether it's like giving myself more time to deep dive into craft books and like watch that Brandon Sanderson lecture that everyone talks about. Because I feel like I kind of avoided some of that in 2024, because I was like, no, Brielle, the practice part of this is the most important. And like, let's start there rather than getting so caught up in theory that I never put words on the page, which I do still stand by that like approach. Yeah. But now I'm at the point where I'm like, I can bring all of this together. I can still focus on the words on the page and try to up level as a writer and put time into self-publishing and feel justified in investing in all of this, because I'll be taking myself more seriously, if that makes sense.
Yes, for sure. Excited to see you leveling up.
Oh, thank you. I feel like that was pretty good. What do you think?
I feel like we covered a lot of ground here today.
I feel like we talked about some things for sure. On that note, I think we'll wrap up for this episode. Thank you so much, Alyssa, for coming on.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be on the AuthorTube Cafe. That sounded sarcastic. It actually is. So.
And if you guys are not already following Alyssa, definitely go check her out at Alyssa and the Books. She is a constant part of my personal viewing experience. So strongly recommend. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll be back next month with another one and another guest. But until then, see you in the next video.
Bye.